Lauren Cho, 35 years old, and until that night, my family still believed I was the failure. The daughter who drifted through odd jobs, never quite figured life out, and certainly couldn't afford to show her face at a luxury hotel. My mother had made that perfectly clear in her text 2 nights before my father's 70th birthday dinner. "Just wear something simple," she wrote. "This place is very upscale. We don't want any confusion about who's paying." I stared at that message for a long time. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that. It probably wouldn't be the last. But something about this particular moment, this particular dinner, made me pause. For the past decade, I had worked quietly, built carefully, and succeeded silently. I had never needed them to understand what I did. I had long since stopped expecting their pride, but this night felt different. Not because I had anything to prove, but because they were about to walk into a space they didn't know I helped build, with their heads held high, thinking I didn't belong there. The dinner was scheduled for 7 o'clock sharp at Avalon, a 5-star hotel perched above the San Francisco Bay. It was the kind of place where valets wear gloves and even the silence feels expensive. My mother had insisted on booking the venue because, as she put it, your sister deserves somewhere appropriate to celebrate her father's big moment. As if I had no part in that story. As if I were a distant cousin, lucky to be included. I arrived at 7:05 p.m. on purpose. Not late enough to be rude, just enough to be noticed. I stepped out of the car alone, wearing a navy moo gown designed by an old friend who now ran a private atelier. It wasn't flashy. It was quiet elegance. Tailored lines, silk that moved like breath. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the entrance. The doorman straightened. The concierge at the front desk glanced up, recognition already blooming in her eyes. But before I could cross the threshold, I heard my mother's voice behind me. "Oh, Lauren, don't!" I turned. She was standing with my sister, Chloe, both dressed in coordinated blush tones. My mother's face was tight with that practiced country club smile, the one that meant we were about to have a scene, but pretend we weren't. "This place is a lot," she said softly. "You really didn't need to come. You know how expensive everything here is. We don't want you to feel out of place." "I'm fine," I replied evenly. "I know where I'm going." Chloe laughed under her breath. "You sure? I can lend you something next time if you don't have the wardrobe for places like this." Before I could respond, the grand glass doors opened. A man in a black suit stepped out, earpiece in place, expression composed. "Ms. Cho," he said with a nod, "everything is ready. Your requested protocol has been initiated." My mother blinked. "Protocol?" Behind him, a team of hotel staff emerged. One of them unfurled a long, deep red carpet across the marble entryway, stretching it from the curb to the private elevator. Guests nearby paused to watch, phones tilted discreetly upward. The air shifted. "Welcome back," the concierge said softly. "We've rolled out the red carpet, just as you asked." Chloe's mouth opened, then closed. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came. I smiled slightly, then turned to step onto the carpet. Each click of my heel echoed in their silence. I didn't look back, because they weren't the ones I was walking toward anymore. I wasn't always the woman who walked down red carpets or designed the floors beneath them. I was, for most of my life, the girl sitting just outside the frame. The quiet one. The odd one. The one who didn't fit. Growing up in a 2-story home in Palo Alto, I was the eldest daughter of Peter and Ellen Cho. My father was an engineer turned professor who believed in facts and timelines. My mother had been a piano teacher in her early years, but transitioned into a full-time homemaker once Chloe was born. Our home was clean, respectable, and orderly, just like my mother's expectations. From an early age, Chloe and I were cast into distinct roles. She was sunshine, bubbly, photogenic, always surrounded by a circle of friends and trophies. I was quiet, reserved, and more interested in sketching room layouts than cheerleading routines. While Chloe rehearsed piano recitals for family dinners, I sat on the floor of my room, designing imaginary restaurants in old sketchbooks. I simply detached. My mother didn't understand detachment. To her, silence was either disrespect or weakness. She'd sigh audibly whenever she passed my door, always half hoping I'd abandon the weird drawings and come bake something with her in the kitchen. "Lauren, you're wasting your time. Doodles won't pay your bills," she said once when she found me tracing lighting angles at 14. "You need a stable path, something real, like pharmacy or teaching." I nodded, but I kept drawing. In high school, I started a small freelance gig designing prom flyers and decor layouts for student events. A local cafe hired me to redesign their interior after seeing a sketch I did of their counter space. I was 17. The project paid me in coffee and gratitude, but it was the first time I saw people move through a space I had shaped. That stayed with me. After graduation, my parents pushed hard for me to attend UC Davis for pharmacy. I lasted 6 months. I didn't fail, I left. Mid-semester, mid-degree, mid-expectation, I transferred to a small design college in Oakland and paid for it with 2 part-time jobs and a mountain of student debt. My mother called it throwing away a future. My father said little, but the disappointment was obvious. They cut off financial support and redirected all their pride into Chloe. Chloe, of course, was everything I wasn't. Clean cut, medical bound, engaged by 24, married into a family of surgeons. My mother wore Chloe's last name like a badge. My daughter, Mrs. Kim, yes, her husband works at Stanford Medical. When people asked about me, she'd pause. "Lauren's creative. She's trying to find her path." But I had found it. It just didn't look like hers. After college, I joined a boutique interior architecture firm that specialized in commercial redesigns. At first, they had me measuring bathroom stalls and ordering sample swatches. But I worked late, absorbed everything, and volunteered for every dull, overlooked job no one else wanted. Slowly, my name began appearing next to the projects that mattered. I started building a reputation for transforming failing spaces, restaurants, hotels, even airport lounges, into places people remembered, not flashy, just deeply functional, atmospheric, and profitable. My designs focused on human flow, hidden light sources, silent elegance. I didn't want to be known. I wanted my work to feel inevitable. At 28, I opened my own design studio with a former mentor. We rented a tiny office above a dry cleaner and started pitching to clients who didn't know we existed. The first year was brutal. We lost money. We lost sleep. But we didn't quit. And then on a quiet Wednesday morning, a client walked in with an opportunity that changed everything. His name was Luciano Reyes, an eccentric chef who'd recently earned his 2nd Michelin star. He wanted to reimagine fine dining as a multi-sensory journey. Most designers thought he was crazy. I thought he was perfect. I redesigned his flagship restaurant in Los Angeles, integrating scent mapping, kinetic light shifts, and adjustable acoustic panels. Within a year, it became the most talked about dining experience on the West Coast. That project led to 3 more, then 6, then hotels, then cruise ships. At 32, I was leading teams of 40, designing for names that once felt untouchable. Avalon, the hotel my family would later choose for my father's birthday dinner, was one of my proudest achievements. Not just because I co-designed every inch of its renovation, but because I bought equity in it after its relaunch. I became a silent partner, attending board meetings in tailored black, using a different last name to keep attention low. But none of that made it home. At family gatherings, my mother still asked if I was doing okay. Chloe would offer me leftover catering from hospital galas, like a charitable act. When I sent a first-class ticket to my parents for their anniversary, they assumed it came from Chloe's husband. When I paid off part of their mortgage anonymously during the pandemic, they called it a blessing from the universe. Eventually, I stopped correcting them. Let them believe I was surviving on gig jobs and freelance side work. Let them think Chloe funded everything. I wasn't bitter. I just no longer needed their validation. But on the night of my father's birthday dinner, something in me shifted. Maybe it was the years of swallowing pride. Maybe it was the fact that I had quietly designed the exact space they were about to celebrate in, every chandelier, every table, every inch of floor they would walk on. Or maybe, just maybe, I was tired of walking behind the frame, and I was ready to let them see what I had really built. Success didn't arrive for me in one dazzling moment. It came slowly, like water carving rock. At 29, I was still paying rent late some months, still taking on bland cafe redesigns just to keep the lights on. My name was occasionally mentioned in industry newsletters, but I wasn't the one invited to panels or opening nights. I stayed behind the curtain by design, no pun intended. Visibility had never been my goal, longevity was. The turning point wasn't loud. It was a series of quiet yeses. A hotel in Napa had been bleeding money for years. They couldn't figure out why guests were unimpressed despite a stunning vineyard view. I redesigned their lobby, stripped away the sterile lighting, replaced chrome with natural textures, and introduced an invisible scent flow using local lavender. I shortened the walking distance between entrance and check-in, adjusted seating angles so no one sat with their back to the view. Revenue doubled in 6 months. They gave me a referral, then another. By 30, I had stopped hustling for work. Clients came to me. We expanded our team to include lighting engineers, acoustic consultants, even behavioral psychologists. My firm was still modest by corporate standards, just 15 full-time staff and a handful of freelancers. But our impact was outsized. We weren't trendy, we were transformative. We worked on spaces people remembered but didn't know why, and that was exactly the point. I started investing not just in spaces but in the businesses themselves. Quiet equity, strategic shares. I never led with ownership. I let my designs prove value, then stepped into partnership when it made sense. That's how Avalon came into my life. At 32, I was brought in to consult on Avalon's renovation. Once a glamorous Art Deco property from the 1930s, it had been gutted by years of bad management and rushed modern makeovers. The bones were still there, beneath the drywall and fluorescent disaster. I walked through the site with gloves on, inhaling history and mold. My proposal was unorthodox. Don't modernize it. Restore it. Let the elegance speak again. The board hesitated. I insisted. I offered to lower my design fee in exchange for a small ownership stake. They agreed, half dismissively, assuming the hotel would take years to turn around. It reopened 18 months later to sold-out rooms, glowing press, and an unsolicited feature in Architectural Digest. That was the first time I felt like my work had left a visible mark on the city. With the success of Avalon, I stopped worrying about financial stability. My firm became selective. We took on only 3 or 4 clients a year. I finally had time to start a foundation I'd been dreaming about, one that gave grants and mentorship to women of color in the design industry. I named it the Elsie Initiative after my initials, but kept my name off the public website. I wanted the mission to stand on its own. At 34, I was splitting my time between project sites, boardrooms, and quiet dinners with fellow designers and early-stage founders. I was invited to speak at conferences I once watched from live streams. I traveled Tokyo, Copenhagen, Buenos Aires, absorbing how space influences human interaction across cultures. But still, I didn't share much of this with my family. It wasn't out of spite, it was self-preservation. Each time I'd tried, the reaction was so consistent it felt rehearsed. "That's nice," my mother would say, before pivoting to Chloe's latest conference appearance or her husband's newest publication. Once, I mentioned a hospitality award I'd received. My mother asked if it was one of those online certificates. Another time, I mailed her a hardcover book that featured a profile on my firm. She said it arrived damaged and never brought it up again. Eventually, I stopped offering details. It was easier to let her believe I was doing some version of gig work, possibly still struggling, but managing. She seemed more comfortable with that narrative, and Chloe didn't ask. She always assumed I was quietly jealous of her life, though we never spoke of it outright. I had learned to keep my worlds separate. In my professional circles, I was known, respected, even admired. In my family, I was tolerated, useful at times, the sister who sent handmade birthday cards, who helped select restaurant decor for weddings, who gifted oddly specific candles during the holidays, quirky, independent, unmarried, unremarkable. I let it be. But something began to shift when my father's 70th birthday approached. The planning started 3 months early. Chloe formed a family group chat titled Dad's Big 700. She took the lead naturally. She suggested venues, menus, guest lists. My mother chimed in with opinions about cake flavors and photo backdrops. I mostly observed. Then one day, Chloe messaged the group, thinking Avalon might be perfect. Classy, good reviews, Dad loves their bourbon list. Thought? My stomach fluttered. Avalon. My Avalon. My mother replied, looks lovely, probably pricey though. We'll see if it fits the budget. Chloe, how much do you think your firm can contribute? I typed and deleted my message 3 times. Then I wrote, I might have a contact there, could ask about group rates. My mother's response came instantly. Let's not impose. I'm sure Chloe and Daniel can handle it. I smiled to myself, closed the chat, and called the hotel. I didn't speak to the reservations team. I called Elise, the general manager I helped recruit 2 years earlier. I asked her to block out the private dining room for that date. I requested a specific layout, warm lighting, floral arrangements with blue thistle, my father's favorite. I asked for the bourbon to be pre-decanted and paired with a personalized tasting flight. Then, I made the most important requests of all. When I arrive, have the red carpet ready. I'll be entering last. Elise hesitated. Do you want us to acknowledge your role? Not until the right moment, I said. Over the next several weeks, I orchestrated everything from behind the scenes. Chloe handled family logistics and seating charts, believing she was the sole visionary. My mother continued to micromanage dessert options. I quietly footed the remaining 70% of the bill under a business alias, my usual protocol for family events. A week before the dinner, Chloe called me directly. Hey, you're still coming, right? Yes, I said. Wouldn't miss it. Cool, she said, sounding distracted. Just make sure you dress appropriately. Avalon's a very polished place. I know, I said. She hesitated, then added, Mom's just worried you might feel out of place. It's not personal. It never was, and yet it always was. That night, after we hung up, I stared at my closet for a long time. Not in panic, but in choice. I had spent so many years shrinking myself to fit into rooms I had long outgrown. But this wasn't their room, it was mine, and I was finally ready to enter it fully. The week before the dinner, I walked through Avalon one last time with Elise. It wasn't necessary. I had approved every square inch of the private dining room months earlier, but I needed to feel the space. The Winston Suite was the hotel's crown jewel. Curved marble walls, hand-blown glass fixtures, velvet panels in slate and midnight blue. I'd designed the acoustics to create a hushed intimacy, even at full capacity, and that night, we would be hosting exactly 24 guests. Elise confirmed that everything had been arranged per my specifications. Custom name cards, curated playlists at ambient levels, dessert trays with my father's favorite ginger lemon cookies, flown in from a bakery he used to frequent decades ago. Every glass, every light dimmer, every folded napkin had intention behind it. This wasn't just a dinner, it was a controlled narrative. Behind the scenes, I arranged for the guest experience team to treat the Thompson family reservation as if it had been booked by a VIP, but with no direct reference to me. I didn't want them to know. Not yet. The story had to unfold on its own timeline. I asked the sommelier to prepare a flight of limited Japanese whiskeys for the toast and added a bottle of Yamazaki 18 for my private collection. No price tags, no clues, I told Elise. Everything should feel seamless, effortless, as if this was always going to be the experience. She understood. 3 days before the event, I received a group message from Chloe confirming final head count. 23 confirmed. Mom says you should probably come early so you're not, last to arrive. I typed nothing in response. My silence was its own answer. That same evening, I called Michael, our firm's chief operations officer and a longtime friend. He wasn't involved in the hotel, but he'd managed high-profile security logistics in his previous career and understood the choreography of moments like this. How dramatic do you want this to be? He asked, not judging. Just calculating. Just enough, I said. Understated, but undeniable. I sent him the arrival timeline. Guests would begin filtering in at 6:30 p.m. for a 7:00 p.m. dinner. I would arrive at exactly 7:07. Michael would position himself at the front doors in a civilian suit, appearing, coincidentally, present. The staff would be briefed to greet me only after I was acknowledged by name. The red carpet, which had been stored away for private celebrity functions, would be brought out only on cue. Not too early, not too late. Timing was everything. The night before the dinner, I slept in my apartment across town, not the hotel. I didn't want to give away my presence too soon. The view from my window was the Bay Bridge, lit like a wire of molten gold across the water. I poured a glass of wine, sat on the floor with my back against the wall, and let the silence wrap around me. I wasn't nervous, I wasn't vindictive, but I was awake, every cell in my body alert, with a quiet clarity I hadn't felt in years. At 11:43 p.m., I received a final text from my mother. Reminder, dinner starts at 7. Don't be late. Please try not to draw attention, just blend in. I stared at the words. So simple, so unaware. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type anything. What was there to say? She'd never been interested in listening. I closed the message and reviewed the final checklist on my iPad. Transportation for guests. Confirmed. Gift bags with handwritten thank you notes from the Avalon team. Packed. Private security, discreetly stationed but invisible, in place. Michael would be there 2 hours early to walk the perimeter. Elise would manage the service flow. Everything else was motion. I set my alarm for 4:45 a.m. the next day. I always woke early on design days, launch days, reveal days, completion days. This wasn't just a birthday dinner. This was a reveal. But not of chandeliers or color palettes, of perception, of legacy, of all the unspoken truths that had filled every gap in every family photo we'd ever taken. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. The next morning passed in soft motion. I meditated, ironed my dress myself, ignored my phone. At 6:30 p.m., I was in the back seat of a black car, watching the city blur past the windows. I arrived 1 block away at 7:05 p.m. and stepped out under fading light. There was no paparazzi, no crowd, just the hushed elegance of a space waiting to become a stage. I approached the entrance slowly. From a distance, I could already see Chloe inside, laughing too loudly with 2 cousins. My mother stood stiffly near the host stand, scanning the room as if searching for misplaced control. Michael saw me first. He nodded once. I nodded back. And then the doors opened. The first thing I felt as I stepped onto the red carpet was the shift in temperature. Not from the air, but from the attention. Heads turned. Conversations slowed. Even the sound of heels on marble seemed to pause for half a second. The velvet rope had already been drawn aside by the concierge. Michael signaled. And as I walked into the lobby, a wave of carefully practiced professionalism washed over the staff. "Good evening, Ms. Cho," the maitre d' said, dipping his head slightly. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forced, but it was heard. By everyone, including my mother. She turned just as the phrase echoed toward the walls. Her face twitched. Eyes narrowing as if trying to decide if she'd misheard or if the universe had just cracked a seam. Chloe, beside her, blinked in rapid succession. My sister's fiancé, David, leaned slightly forward, as if trying to piece together a conversation he hadn't been invited to. I smiled. Not wide, just enough. My mother began walking toward me in short, stiff steps. Her mouth had already formed the words before she even reached me. "Lauren, what is this?" Her voice wasn't angry yet, just confused, suspicious. The way people sound when a trick has gone on slightly too long. I didn't answer immediately. I looked at her, then at Chloe, then at the guests slowly gathering by the entrance to the Winston suite. My father hadn't arrived yet, which was perfect. I turned to Michael and nodded once. He leaned toward the maitre d' and said something too quiet to catch. Seconds later, a quiet bell chimed from the corridor, and 2 hosts appeared to escort the remaining guests to the dining room. My mother opened her mouth again, but I spoke first this time. "Let's go inside, it's about to start." I didn't explain anything else. I didn't need to. Inside, the Winston suite looked like it had been lifted from a film set. Candlelight flickered gently across polished glass. The air held just the faintest scent of bergamot and cedar. At the center of the room, the table stretched like a formal artery, every place setting marked with name cards in calligraphy. At the head of the table, Dr. Peter Cho. The chair beside it, reserved for my mother, had a small white orchid resting on the plate. Beside Chloe's place card, a handwritten note. Congratulations on the promotion. It was Elise's idea, a gesture that appeared generous but also unnervedly informed. As we all took our seats, the staff moved in seamless choreography. Wine poured, menus unfolded, bread offered. My mother hadn't spoken again. Chloe was clearly trying to calculate the odds that this was a mistake or an elaborate prank. Meanwhile, I sat in silence, folded neatly into the moment, like a blade inside silk. 7:14, my father entered. He was exactly on time by his own definition, just late enough to make an entrance, just early enough to remain punctual. He was wearing the tie I had sent anonymously for his birthday. I knew he would. He smiled warmly as guests greeted him. Then his gaze swept the room and landed on me. His expression faltered, just a flicker, then steadied again. "Lauren?" he asked as he approached. "I didn't expect you this early." "I'm precisely on time," I replied. "Welcome." He looked around. This is quite a place, very elegant. Is this your doing?" The question hung in the air, both innocent and loaded. I tilted my head slightly. "All of it." My mother blinked. "What do you mean, all of it?" At that exact moment, Jackson, the general manager, appeared at my shoulder with a practiced grace. "Ms. Cho," he said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear but quiet enough to seem intimate. "Everything is proceeding as you requested. Chef Elise wanted me to let you know that the lamb has rested perfectly and your father's bourbon flight has been set for 9:15. Chloe's hand went still over her napkin. My mother's mouth parted slightly but produced no sound. My father just stared. A long silence followed. Then I turned to the table. "Before we begin, I'd like to thank you all for coming. This dinner isn't just for my father. It's for every person in this room who's ever believed that love means listening. Even when you don't understand someone, even when they take a different path." Another pause. "Some of you know me as Chloe's sister, or Ellen and Peter's quiet daughter. Some of you didn't know me at all until this evening. That's all right. I've spent most of my adult life building things that don't need to shout to be seen." The staff continued their motion. Salads arrived, wine refilled, conversations resumed, but something fundamental had shifted. The room was no longer shared space, it was mine, and everyone knew it. Throughout the meal, the questions began, hesitantly at first. A cousin leaned in and asked, "Wait, you designed this?" Another guest added, "Are you, on the team, or—" I nodded. "I'm one of the owners. I led the redesign. Avalon is part of my firm's collection." Chloe let out a small sound, part laugh, part cough. "Since when?" I turned to her. "Since 4 years ago. The same year Mom told me I should apply for a receptionist job somewhere so I could at least be near real business people." She winced. So did my mother. Dessert arrived in silence. A custom dish made of tea-soaked sponge, candied ginger, and brown butter, a play on my father's favorite cookie. He tasted it, paused, and looked at me. "This is exactly like the ones from that bakery in Koreatown back in 1992. "Because it's the same recipe," I said. I tracked down the original baker. He's retired now, but he let us recreate it for tonight. The pride in his face fought against the confusion. He still didn't know how far this had gone, how deep. After dinner, as guests lingered over whiskey and stories, Chloe pulled me aside. Her face was flushed. You could have told us. You let us sit here like fools. You assumed I was struggling, I said. You never asked. You filled in the silence with your own narrative. But why hide it? I didn't hide it, I just didn't correct you. There's a difference. She didn't respond. Later, my father found me near the bar, away from the noise. He was holding a small glass of Yamazaki, eyes still scanning the room like it might shift again. So, he said slowly, you own this. Yes. And you designed it. Yes. And no one knew? Except the people who mattered. He nodded. I'm not sure if I'm more shocked or impressed. Maybe both. You don't have to choose, I said. They can exist together. He looked down at his glass. I think I owe you more than one apology. I said nothing. I didn't need to hear the apology. I needed the awareness, the clarity. And tonight, I had it. As the last guests filtered out, as the candles dimmed and the floor staff began to clear the room, I walked the perimeter of the Winston suite one more time. My heels clicked softly across the marble I'd approved. I adjusted a single flower in a centerpiece. Then I stopped in front of the red carpet, now empty, rolled back, its fibers still warm from a moment that had finally arrived. Michael stepped beside me. You ready to go? Not yet. Want to stay and breathe it in? I nodded. He didn't say anything else. I stood there a while longer, letting the silence fill every corner of my chest. Not with sadness, not even with triumph, just stillness. This was what respect felt like, not when it was handed to you, but when it was reclaimed. The next morning, my phone lit up before sunrise. Missed calls, a few terse texts from my mother, a long, surprisingly quiet message from Chloe. I think we need to talk. Just us, no drama. I didn't respond immediately. I sat at the edge of my bed in the penthouse, coffee in hand, watching the fog roll off the bay like a slow breath. The city felt distant, and for once, that was a comfort. By 10 a.m., I had a message from my father, too. No anger, no confusion, just, you built something incredible. Let's talk when you're ready. At 11:30, I met Chloe at a quiet cafe halfway between her office and mine. She was already seated, typing furiously on her phone, tapping her nails against the ceramic cup in front of her. When I approached, she looked up. Her expression was more human than I expected. No performance, just exhaustion. You know, she started without preamble, we thought you were lost, that you were drifting. You let us believe that. I stirred my tea slowly. You believed what made you comfortable to believe. I let it happen because correcting you became too costly. Costly how? She asked, genuinely puzzled. Emotionally, mentally. Every conversation about my work turned into a subtle competition I didn't agree to join. I stopped inviting myself into spaces where I had to shrink. She sat back. You sound like a stranger. No, I corrected. I sound like someone who finally stopped pretending. She looked down at her hands. I was jealous, you know. You always seemed so untouched. You didn't care what Mom said. You didn't need the same things I did. I cared, I said softly. But I stopped allowing that care to define me. That's different. There was silence between us for a while. Then she leaned forward, voice quieter. Is this the end of us? Not if you're willing to see me as I am, not as I was, or as you preferred me to be. You're still my sister, she said. That hasn't changed. I nodded once. But the terms of that relationship have. Later that afternoon, I met my father in the rooftop garden of the Athena. He walked slower than usual, a subtle limp betraying the years. But when he saw me, he smiled in that old way of his, the one that used to mean everything when I was 5, and very little by the time I turned 25. I never saw this coming, he admitted as he sat. I thought I knew everything about you. You knew the parts you asked about, I replied gently. You didn't ask often. He nodded, not defensive. Your mother's struggling. She feels humiliated. She feels exposed, I corrected. There's a difference. No one humiliated her. She built her version of me without asking for the truth. The truth showed up anyway. We sat in silence for a long while. Then he turned to me. "What happens now?" "Boundaries," I said simply. "No more pretending, no more convenient narratives. I won't dim to keep the peace. You can be proud or uncomfortable, but I won't be invisible." "You're not," he said quietly. "Not anymore." That evening, Michael poured us both a drink in my office, glancing at the unopened messages still piling up from my mother. "Are you going to reply?" "Eventually," I said. "When I know she wants a conversation, not a confrontation." He raised his glass. "To the new script." I clinked mine against his. "To finally writing it myself." 1 week after the dinner, I finally agreed to meet my mother on my terms. A neutral setting, a defined start and end time, a moderator. Dr. Lanier, my longtime advisor, agreed to sit in. My mother arrived 10 minutes early, dressed like she was walking into a deposition rather than a conversation. Her bag was structured, her eyes sharper than I remembered. She didn't speak when she entered. She sat, adjusted her scarf, and folded her hands in her lap like a woman preparing to defend something. "Why here?" she asked, looking around the minimalist room. "Because here we don't perform," I said calmly. "We discuss." She sighed. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to believe I would fail either. But you did. Consistently." Her mouth tightened. "We didn't understand your choices." "You didn't try to," I replied. "You assumed that because I wasn't chasing what you recognized, I must be failing. You turned a lack of curiosity into a narrative of incompetence." She looked away. "I suppose I thought I was protecting you." "You were protecting yourself," I said, "from the discomfort of not being the authority, from the possibility that your daughter could define success in a way you couldn't control." She went still, the silence stretched. Finally she said, "I'm not sure how to be in your life now." I nodded. "That's a more honest place to start than pretending everything is fine. We don't have to rebuild overnight, but we do have to start from reality, not nostalgia." "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "I want space to choose, to invite, not to be expected to perform daughterhood on demand. If you want to be in my life, you'll have to meet me where I am, not where you hoped I'd be." She didn't speak after that, not immediately, but she stayed the full hour, and she listened. That was more than I expected, less than I wanted, but it was something. The months that followed were quieter. My father began calling regularly, not with small talk, but with curiosity. He asked about operations, design, staffing strategy. For the first time, he wasn't trying to understand me as his daughter, he was trying to understand me as a peer. It changed the nature of our conversations. They became rooted in mutual respect, not performance. He started visiting Avalon more frequently, walking the corridors with the pride of someone witnessing something he hadn't believed possible. "I never imagined this," he said once, sipping his bourbon in the rooftop lounge. "Not just the hotel, but the clarity. You live with such purpose." I smiled. I had to. No one was going to give it to me. Chloe took longer. She called occasionally, sometimes with vague attempts at reconnecting, other times with requests veiled as opportunities. I learned to listen without absorbing, to engage without enabling. Eventually, she invited me to lunch. No agenda, just a quiet hour where we talked. Not about work or competition, but about books, food, places we'd never visited. She didn't apologize, but she didn't deflect either. And in our family, that was its own kind of progress. As for my mother, she stopped trying to control the narrative. Slowly, unevenly, but it happened. She stopped calling unexpectedly, stopped referring to my work as that hotel thing. She even asked for a private tour of Avalon, which I granted on a weekday mid-morning with no guests present. She said little as we walked, touched the banisters, studied the light fixtures, stood in the private library for a full 5 minutes without speaking. "You built this," she said finally. Not with surprise, not with bitterness, just acknowledgement. Yes, I said, I built all of it. And she nodded. But perhaps the most meaningful shift wasn't in my family, it was in me. I no longer lived in reaction to their expectations. I no longer sought permission or explanation. I had recalibrated the architecture of our relationships. And in doing so, I reclaimed something far more valuable than approval: autonomy. 6 months after that night, we held Avalon's 5-year gala. The room was filled with investors, designers, chefs, and clients. Toward the end of the evening, as speeches were winding down, one of the scholarship recipients from the Women's Hospitality Initiative approached me. She was 22, nervous, bright-eyed. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said, "for showing that we don't have to wait to be invited to the table. We can build the table ourselves." I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," I said quietly. "And don't let anyone tell you what your table should look like." Later that night, I stood alone on the balcony, watching the skyline pulse with light. Michael joined me briefly, handing me a glass of champagne. "Anything left to prove?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just more to build." "And your family?" "They're learning," I said, "or unlearning. Either way, it's not the center of my story anymore." That was the real shift. Not the dinner, not the carpet, not even the moment their faces changed when they realized who I was. The real transformation was quieter. It was the day I stopped needing them to see me in order to see myself. People say success is the best revenge. I disagree. Indifference is. Living without needing their approval. Living fully, completely, loudly, in spaces they once said I didn't belong. That is the truest, sharpest triumph. But in my case, it wasn't even triumph I was after. It was peace. And that finally I had.